welcome to Board with Paint. Today we'll be painting the Striga from The Witcher Old World. I've already prepared the miniature for painting by scraping off mold lines. Then I did a zenithal prime on the miniature by covering it entirely with black, then spraying gray from the front and sides and white from above. Let's get started. We're going to go with an almost black skin here, so I'm mixing Necro Grey with Eldandil Violet from Scale Color. What we're going for is a very dark near black with just a touch of purple. And then I'm covering all of the creature's skin with this. Next, we'll paint all of the rock and stonework on the base with Stonewall Grey from Vallejo. I'm using this to cover most of the base except for the areas that are very highly textured and look like dirt. We'll go with a brownish color for that later. And here I'm filling in those textured dirt areas with Zandri Dust. Now to darken up the entire base, I'm giving it a coat of Grim Black from the Army Painter Speedpaint line. This should be applied fairly thick and allowed to pool in the recesses just like a wash. For the creature's hair, we'll be using Hull Red as a base coat. For the clothing, I'm going for sort of a dirty white. So we're going to start off with a base coat of Iraqi Sand, and that'll go over all of the cloth. Next, we'll try to bring out some of the edges on the base by dry brushing in white. What I'm doing here is taking an old makeup brush, covering it with white paint, and then brushing off the excess on a paper towel. When this is brushed over an area of the model, it'll leave paint on the raised surfaces, but should leave the recesses deep in shadow. I'm not worrying too much if I get it on the rest of the miniature because we're going to be going through a highlighting step after this, and we can cover up any mistakes. Now I'll add some character to the base with some washes. I'm starting with Seraphim Sepia and filling this in some of the recesses and the dirt areas. I'm sort of applying this haphazardly just to get some color mixed in there. Next, I'm using Athonian Camoshade, and this will go in anywhere that I think would collect moisture, where you would see some algae or some other plant life starting to grow. Again, I'm not being very neat with this. This is just getting splotched here and there, and I'm letting it pool in places and streak in other places. The idea is we want this to look like old, dirty stone. Now we'll start to highlight the skin by taking our initial base color and mixing in some Fenrisian Grey. This is a very cold gray that'll serve as our highlight color. For most of the skin that's covered in these big, thick muscles, we're just covering most of the muscle with the highlight color, leaving the dark in the recesses. As we lighten the highlight over several different layers, we'll then cover less and less of each muscle. We want to be sure here to pick out each finger individually. For the legs, I'm hitting the back of the calf muscles that are facing upward and the backs of the heels. For the face, we want to just focus on the areas that have raised texture. This will include the ears, the forehead, and the nose especially, but you may also want to get some highlight on that chin and the cheekbones. Now we'll repeat this highlight over several layers, and we'll add a little bit more of the Fenrisian Grey each time. Then when we go to our model, we'll just cover a slightly smaller area, each time getting smaller and smaller, building up that highlight until we feel like it's bright enough. When highlighting the face, make sure you avoid the eye sockets and the mouth. And here I'm continuing to mix in some of the Fenrisian Grey. This is about where I stop, but feel free to go further if you want more contrast. Next, to ease over some of those transitions, I'm mixing in some water with our base color to get a nice glaze. You can see the consistency there. Make sure you dry your brush on a paper towel before taking it over to the miniature. We want to keep control over this. Now all we want to do here is start from the highlighted area and brush down into the darker areas. The transparent layer of paint that we're laying down will help ease the transitions between the shadows and the highlights and make that gradient much smoother. If you go through this once and are still seeing some separation between your layers, you can do this again over and over until they're as smooth as you want. Just be sure to wait until each layer is completely dry before moving on to the next one. I'm returning to the base, this time with some Nuln Oil shade, and this is going to add even more dirt and grime and reinforce some of the shadows and separations between the rocks. I'm not putting it everywhere, but I am using it pretty liberally. Next, we'll start highlighting the hair by mixing our Fenrisian Grey in with the Hall Red. Now we'll apply this on the upper portion of the hair that's receiving the most light. I'm not worried about the individual strands at this point. I'm just creating a big block of highlight color. Now I'll mix in some more of the Fenrisian Grey and do this again, but covering a smaller area, keeping the highlights closer to the top. You may want to start picking out individual strands at this point. Now for a third layer with even more gray. This one I'm keeping pretty focused on the top of the head. It will look pretty stark at this point, but we'll return to it later once it dries. At this point, I decided to pick out the teeth with Iraqi Sand. And then I used some Necro Grey to paint the inside of the mouth. You could also use a red for this, but I thought the dark color made it look a little scarier, like it was this bottomless maw. Now I'm using the same color to pick out the fingernails and toenails. Now I'll mix some of the Stonewall Grey in with Necro Grey and use this to highlight each nail. Just add a little spot of light on each one. I decided to brighten this up with a touch of pure Stonewall Grey. Now we'll move on to the red outside the mouth, and here I'm thinning down some Mayhem Red with some water, and I'm creating a glaze. You can see what consistency I'm going for here. And once again, we want to wick off the excess on a paper towel. and we'll use this to brush around the outside of the mouth. This should be very transparent, so we'll do it in a few different layers, waiting for it to dry completely between each one. And here I'm getting ready for a second layer. Now we'll finish up the hair by thinning down some Hull Red with some water. You want this to really flow nicely, and we'll brush it over the entire area of hair. This will bring those highlighted areas back towards red and tie everything together nicely. If you see it changing the color of your highlights too much, your paint is probably too thick, so add some more water. Next, we'll start to highlight the clothing by mixing some white in with the Iraqi Sand and doing our first layer the way we've done all the other highlighting. White is a pretty tough color to highlight, so we'll be moving the color only very slightly each time we do a layer. This first layer just has very little white in it. It's still close to the Iraqi Sand. Now for the second layer, we'll go with some more white. This is about a 50-50 mix. And here we're going with some more white and doing the highlighting again. Each time we're covering slightly less space than before. As we continue to apply the layers, you should slowly start to see the clothing transition from sort of a yellowish brown to actually starting to look like white. We definitely don't want to go too bright on the white because Strigas do like to sleep inside of crypts. We can use the same mix of colors to highlight the teeth a little bit and to cover up where the red got on them earlier. Now to dirty up the clothing, I'm mixing some Agrax Earthshade with some Lahmian Medium. I don't know if that's still available to get from Citadel, but I had some left over. You could use any old glaze medium for this instead if you have it. I just don't want the full strength of Agrax Earthshade right out of the pot. Anyways, I'm using this to cover all the areas that we just painted of the clothing. This should bring out the shadows and give it a little bit of a dirty look. You can see here at some point I painted the insides of the eyes with pure white off camera. That sets us up for this next step, where I'm thinning down some of the Mayhem Red again and using this to glaze over the whites of the eyes to give a glowing effect. There's the result after glazing in that red. Next, I decided to add some more shading to the hair with some Carroburg Crimson. I'm focusing this down in the lower parts of the hair and avoiding the parts that we highlighted. here I'm returning to the Nuln Oil and using this to just dirty up the clothing a little bit more. I'm not covering all of the clothing, I'm just sort of putting splotches and dirt stains wherever I feel like it would help. And while I had this out, I decided to add some more Nuln Oil to the base. And to finish everything up, I'm painting the rim of the base in Abbadon Black. And here we have the completed Striga. Thanks for watching. If you're still with me, why don't you subscribe to my channel and like the video? And leave me a comment down below and let me know which monster from The Witcher is your favorite, or which one you want me to paint next. If you're interested in more from me, I sometimes post on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. You'll find me at Bored with Paint on all of those platforms. Thanks again for watching, and until next time, happy painting.